Hello and welcome back to Downtime Activities. Matthew here with another help action. Today we're going to be going over stealth and surprise. If you've played D&D 5e at all, I'm sure you have snuck around somewhere or had to try and spot someone trying to sneak up on you. And typically it's pretty straightforward. One side rolls stealth, other side rolls perception. Winner sees it coming or doesn't. However, there's a lot more detail that goes into this than people think, especially with surprise rounds. And there's lots of rules and stuff that I, diving into the rules to make this video, kind of learned and found out just how specifically it works, rules is written. So I'm going to be going over all of that, as well as going over just some general advice for DMs out there who want to use stealth and surprise in their game, and how best to use that, and how I think you can kind of adjust the rules or interpret the rules to make those things make sense and work well in your games. So let's check it out. Before I dive into the stealth and surprise rules, there's a couple of tangentially associated rule systems that I'm going to go over here just to kind of make sense of how some of this stuff is going to break down. First and foremost, a pretty straightforward one, but one that there's a little bit of more detail to, and that's passive perception. Passive perception is what you're going to use as a player or a DM for a character who is needing to make a perception check, but isn't actively searching for whatever they're trying to perceive. To determine what a passive perception is, it will be 10 plus the perception bonus of the creature involved. However, you also will give that creature a +5 if they have advantage, or would have advantage on a perception check in that situation, or a -5 if they would have disadvantage for that passive perception score. And that's something to keep in mind whenever you are determining what the passive perception in a given situation is. Another set of rules here we're going to go over really quick is the vision and light rules. When dealing with perception checks, it's important to know if the character attempting to be perceived or attempting to perceive something is in a lightly or heavily obscured area. Lightly obscured would be something in dim light, patchy fog, etc., and that gives disadvantage on perception checks. Heavily obscured would be something inside of darkness or completely opaque fog, stuff along those lines, and it is more or less the blinded condition for all creatures inside of it. As far as light goes, bright light will give no ill effects. It will be neither lightly or heavily obscured if a creature is in bright light, and the rules do specify that even on a gloomy day, it still would be considered bright light. So this doesn't necessarily mean directly under the bright sun. This just means well lit enough that the human eye could perceive pretty straightforward everything that's going on around it. As far as other lighting conditions, there is dim light. Dim light would be shadows, etc., and that will be the lightly obscured vision situation inside of dim light, and darkness, which will be heavily obscured. Now, on to the hiding rules. The hiding rules are going to be our main kind of stealth rule set, and that's going to be what we use to determine how characters are sneaking and how hard it is to perceive them. The hiding rules go as follows. The creature trying to hide will make a stealth check versus the perception check for any creatures that are actively searching for them, or the passive perception of those creatures if they are not. You cannot hide if you are clearly visible, and you give away your position, even if hidden, if you make any noise, i.e. shouting a warning to your allies. You can always try to hide if you're invisible. Even if you're standing in the center of a room, you are not clearly visible because you are invisible, so you can attempt to hide. At the DM's discretion, a character can gain advantage on an attack against a creature, even if they move out of hiding to attack it, so long as that creature, it would make sense for them to have advantage on the attack against, i.e. they're distracted or something along those lines. Attacking, when you are hidden, even from range, reveals your location every time you attack. Even if you're super well hidden, tucked away somewhere, and you fire an arrow at the creature, they know where it came from. You are no longer hidden, unless you have a specific ability or feat that states otherwise. A brief side note of another little section of stealth-associated rules is moving stealthily while traveling. This rule set basically just means so that when traveling as a group, you can travel at a slow pace, and the characters in that group can move stealthily. As long as they are not in the open, so you're not tramping through a desert or walking along a major road, you could try to surprise or sneak by other creatures that you would encounter on the road, at which point you would use the rules for hiding. That's the basic gist of stealth. However, surprise rounds is what I really want to kind of dial in and focus on in this video, because that's where the rules get a little bit more muddy. The rules for surprise read as follows. The DM compares the dexterity stealth checks of anyone hiding with the passive wisdom perception score of each creature on the opposing side. Any character or monster that doesn't notice a threat is surprised at the start of the encounter. If you're surprised, you can't move or take an action until that turn ends, and you can't take a reaction until that turn ends. A member of a group can be surprised even if the other members aren't. So there's a couple things to break down here. To start with, a specific character might be unable to take any action in the first round of combat while their allies still act normally. This is that last sentence. A member can be surprised, but just because one member of the group is surprised doesn't mean the whole group is. And just because part of a group sees something coming, that doesn't mean that they all see it coming. So it's separate by individual whether they're getting to act or not in a surprise round. Another really important note here is a section of this that I think gets overlooked a lot, and that is the part that says any character or monster that doesn't notice a threat is surprised at the start of the encounter. The important piece here is only if they failed to notice a threat, meaning that this is only if all the characters are attempting a stealthy approach and all of their stealth checks were higher than the perception check of the creature they're sneaking up on. This means even if one character's stealth check fails to beat the passive perception of the creature in question, or a character chooses to approach openly while other characters are sneaking around, that character has noticed a threat and can therefore act in the surprise round, although they can still only act against threats that they are aware of. A last very important note for kind of combat in general, but also pertains to surprise rounds, a character declaring an attack prompts initiative to be rolled before the attack resolves, even if that attack is on a surprise creature. For example, if the party's kind of sneaking up into position and one of the characters says that they want to make a stealthy archery shot from stealth to start this surprise round, them stating that prompts initiative to be rolled before they fire that arrow. At that point, if they are successful with their stealth, they may get to still fire that arrow before any of the other characters act, but the act of firing that arrow does not happen until that character's turn in the surprise round. It doesn't start the combat, it is part of it. This is kind of a weird and muddy thing it's kind of hard to exactly pin down sometimes in combat, because oftentimes combats are started by an action, but rules as written are that, as I said, anyone declaring an attack prompts initiative to be rolled, and that always happens before that attack resolves. Next up, I'd like to break down just a little bit of advice that I think is really helpful when using stealth or surprise in your games. First up bit of advice is only roll a perception check for creatures actively searching. Otherwise, use passive perception. This seems self-explanatory, but oftentimes I can think of times that I've been running a game and the characters are trying to sneak into a place where people aren't really searching for anyone to be sneaking in, and I still just reflexively roll a perception check for those creatures. This may just be having a brain for older editions, but it's not how the rules are meant to work, and honestly, using those passive perceptions makes a lot of sense and can work really well in the game. This means that there's not going to be that kind of random critical success on a perception check for a stealth mission that should be easy because they're sneaking into a place and no one's looking for them. I would, however, treat any creature who is on patrol or stationed as a lookout as actively searching all the time. Just because they don't know someone's trying to break in or attack wherever they're at doesn't mean it's not still their job as the stationed lookout to keep an eye out for trouble and therefore be actively searching for it. Another bit of advice that seems kind of self-explanatory but is really important is be realistic on when you allow stealth checks to happen. The rules say that characters can't try to hide if they're clearly visible, so don't let them roll a stealth check if they're clearly visible. Even if a character rolls a 30, they don't disappear and turn invisible if they're right in front of somebody. Don't let them roll a stealth check if they're clearly visible to avoid characters being frustrated because they rolled well, but they're still visible because they rolled in a situation where logically they can't hide. Next up, remember that just because a creature notices some of the party and therefore gets to act in a surprise round, as I mentioned before, that doesn't mean that they can attack whomever they want. They can only interact with the people they see. So the characters who are successfully stealthy still get a benefit for sneaking up on them. And the characters who came in loud or accidentally stumbled and made noise moving into this situation are the only ones that they can see and interact with. And also remember that all characters acting in a surprise round can only act with that information that they have available to them, what they've seen and noticed. For example, if the only creatures that a group see approaching are not being hostile, they might not attack back at the group of players until that stealthy character successfully attacks them during that surprise round. This might mean that for that surprise round, even if enemies are getting a turn in the initiative order, they're kind of just delaying their turn or not taking an action, just calling out to the approaching characters, trying to discover what the situation is, etc. Make sure that the characters or the NPCs, the monsters you're running, act appropriate for the situation, given the information that they have, what they've noticed. I would also consider using kind of group stealth checks whenever the party is attempting to travel stealthily. This should probably not apply to surprise rounds, but just characters trying to stealthily move about from one place to the next. It's some way, it can be kind of hand-wavy and feel like you're cheating for that one character who should be messing up stealth, but there are times where a group of more or less very stealthy characters assisting their less stealthy party member can make sense. As I said before, though, this does not apply to surprise rounds. I would not let a group stealth check work for a surprise round. If there's one big clunky person, they're going to ring that dinner bell and therefore let a lot of the enemies likely act in that surprise round, and probably act against them if the rest of the party is sneaky. A last bit of advice, remember to always account for adjustments to passive perception for characters. If the party is sneaking up on someone in an area of dim light that is not actively searching for them, then give that passive perception a -5. They're not actively looking, and the creatures or the players moving up are kind of tucked away in the darkness. They should have that disadvantage, theoretically, on the passive perception check. It's something to really keep in mind and make sure you apply. Likewise, if for whatever reason the characters not actively searching are able to have advantage on their check for some reason, give that passive perception a +5 and make it harder for the other group to be sneaking up on them. That has been Stealth and Surprise in 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons. Hope you found that useful. Hope this has clarified some stuff that maybe you've had confusion on in your games. If it did, please give the video a like. Please go down in the comments and give any other advice that you personally have or kind of your rules you use or ways you change the rules for Stealth and Surprise in your games. Now go forth, slay dragons, sling spells, roll dice, and enjoy your downtime activities.